Fresh off my first race of 2022, and I am itching to get back out there. Cheers, y'all. How's it going? I run on beer here, and as I mentioned in the intro, I am fresh off my first race of 2022 this past weekend. I've also got the David Goggins 4x4x48 challenge coming up this coming weekend, and we are just under 8 weeks away from the Delaware Marathon, which as of now is really my big major goal race for the year, my first marathon of the year. And I am just feeling really strong about training, really good about the trajectory I'm on and the progress that I've been making, and just very, very excited to see what these next few weeks hold. So I figured I'd give a quick recap of this past weekend's race, an update on where I am in marathon training. But before I jump into that, a quick note about the Goggins Challenge. I know I had my video last week letting you know that I'd be participating, a little bit of an overview of the challenge as well if you want to check that out, but mostly looking to see who else will be participating. And I am very excited to see that there are plenty of other folks joining this year as well. I will be doing a live kickoff on YouTube at 10 p.m. on Friday. I know that's a little bit later than normal, but that is 1 hour before the challenge is set to kick off. So 10 p.m. Eastern. If you are participating, I hope you'll join the live video so we can all celebrate, kind of drum up the excitement, and get ready to begin that 48-hour challenge. But that being said, let's jump into the recap from this past weekend's race, my first race of 2022, specifically the Al Gordon 4-miler put on by the New York Roadrunners. This was my first New York Roadrunners race outside of the New York City Marathon. Kind of surprising given how long that I've lived in proximity to New York City, but very, very excited to take on the race. I am teasing the idea of participating in the 9+1 challenge. If you're unfamiliar, basically what that means is that if you run 9 individual New York Roadrunner races throughout a calendar year and then volunteer for one, that's the +1, you get guaranteed entry to the New York City Marathon for the following year. So if I can run 9 of their races this year, volunteer at 1, I will get guaranteed entry to the New York City Marathon in 2023. So again, not totally committed, but figured I'd start jumping into some races early on in the year in case I decide to go for that later in the year. So I was excited to hop into my first New York Roadrunners race of the year, the Al Gordon 4-miler this past weekend. That race specifically was run in Brooklyn in Prospect Park, just kind of one full loop around the park. Really, really great race. I have to say, I expected nothing less, but was just so incredibly impressed with the logistics, planning, and organization of the New York Roadrunners race. Again, they put on just an insane amount of events every year, the amount of coordination it takes, and so they just have this down to a science. Definitely a very well-oiled machine, but everything from packet pickup to bag drop-off and even getting your bags back after the race. There were thousands of folks running this race, and just the speed at which they were able to process everyone, get everyone lined up at the starting line, incredibly, incredibly impressive. So went into the race not meaning to push myself by any means, not going to break any records, just excited to run a race, be back to in-person events, see all these other runners out here. I feel like over the last few years, running has felt like even more of a solitary sport than it has in the past, just because of the lack of in-person events. So just great again to get into an in-person race, and was very excited to line up on that starting line. I have run in Prospect Park before. I knew to expect kind of some rolling hills as we did that loop around the outskirts of the park, but also, like I said, wasn't looking to break any records, so just went out looking to enjoy the race overall. And if we take a look at my splits, I think you can see how much I was enjoying myself during this race, because I started off very conservatively, a little over an 8-minute mile, I think around like 8:05 minute pace, somewhere in that range for the first mile, just kind of running with the pack. It was a little congested at the start, narrow paths, narrow corral, so it took a little while to kind of weave in and out of folks and really find a more comfortable pace. Going into the second mile, started to be able to speed up. The crowd started to open up a bit, so I shaved about a minute off of my pace between the first and second mile down to like a 7:05 minute pace. And then at that point, I knew I had crossed the halfway point. Again, not worrying about trying to kill myself, trying to really just like gun it to the finish line, but also was just enjoying feeling some speed in my legs. So I think for that third mile, I dropped to the mid to low 650s, 652, 653 minute mile for that third mile, and then the fourth mile down into the 640s, around a 645 minute mile. And just, as I mentioned, felt really good. My legs felt strong. Crossed that finish line at just under 29 minutes, a 7-minute, 14-second mile overall pace for the entire event. So just again, a nice fun run on a Saturday morning in Brooklyn. Had some friends join me as well for the day, Alyssa and Steve. Shout out to y'all, both training for their first half marathon. Very excited to see how that goes for them later in this spring, but just really excited to take on the first race of the year and possibly begin that journey of completing the 9+1 for guaranteed entry to New York City's marathon next year. And speaking of marathons, we are less than 8 weeks away from my major goal race for the spring, the Delaware Marathon, coming up on April 24th in Wilmington, Delaware. As a reminder, if you're interested in running with me, I do have a discount for registration. I'm running this race as part of my participation in the Bib Brave Pros program. So if you would like to join me in Delaware, my hometown, for the marathon, April 24th, I have that 10% discount code down below in the description. But that being said, let's touch in about how training is going, because like I said, I am just feeling really, really good. If you've been following along up until now, you know that I've been in a period of endurance training, an endurance block of training, just a lot of longer, slower mileage efforts, just rebuilding that aerobic base, that endurance base, before starting to add in some speed towards the tail end of training. The focus that my coach and I are working on is, again, I really fell off just the consistency in my training at the end of 2021 and throughout a lot of 2021 in general. And so the real goal for the start of 2022 was just to rebuild that consistency, and definitely starting to see that in training. First, just in my weekly mileage, I'm up to kind of low 30s, although I did fall off a little bit the last couple weeks just with some vacations, recovery weeks, and things like that. But obviously gonna see a significant bump with the 48 miles in the David Goggins Challenge this weekend, but just really feeling good about where I'm at in weekly mileage and liking the trajectory that I'm on. Another thing that I love to see, if you watch kind of my goal layout video for the year, I talked about Smash Run. Not a plug, it's a free service if you wanna use it, but I think it's a great way to kind of track cumulative training over long term, over several years. And they have this one graphic that shows you your trailing 365-day mileage. So from today, it has your total mileage over the last 365 days. And looking at that, I know I peaked right around the beginning of 2020 when I was training for the Bandera 100K, my first ultra marathon. And I correlate that with also when I was just feeling the best in my running, feeling the strongest, and wanting to get back to that point. And I've sort of been on a downward trend since then. So a big goal for myself is to try to get that line to once again start trending upwards as I slowly try to climb my way back to that point. And I am happy to say that although it's small, if we zoom in, you can see that line has just barely started to tick back up. I'm hoping to continue to see that, because if we go back a year from right now, that was when I got my injury in early 2021, where I was barely running at all through February and March. So I think as long as I continue with this consistency and with this strong training, we'll continue to see that line start to climb. So very, very excited about that. Like I said, at about 30 miles per week right now, still in that endurance block of training. I've got 2 more weeks of the endurance training, those longer, slower duration efforts. But then after those 2 weeks, we will start to dial up the intensity gradually leading up to the marathon, with 1 week of steady state running and then 1 week of threshold training, capping off with 1 week of VO2 max, or closer to like interval style training, all leading up to the taper before trailing off in that mileage before the marathon on April 24th. The last thing I'll mention just briefly in regards to training is, although I'm not necessarily nervous, I'm certainly a little concerned with the climbing early on in the Delaware Marathon, especially in the first half of the race. It's a lot of kind of just gradual uphill. It's where I used to run growing up. It's where I run when I'm visiting home. So I'm definitely used to it, but I am going to try to talk to my coach and figure out when my longest run is gonna be before the race and see if I can coordinate a trip home so that I can do that longest run, that 20-22 miler on the actual course itself, get those hills in during the early part of the run and then finish it out. So again, I'm used to how my legs are gonna feel during the marathon, hopefully a little bit more than just practicing on the flat ground here on the beach. So that's a quick glance or overview of where I'm at with training right now and what's to come over the next 7.5-ish weeks. But overall, I just can't stress enough how good I'm feeling in my running. Just my pace, stride, cadence, heart rate, etc. It's starting to feel not necessarily easier, but just a lot more comfortable, more freeing, like everything's starting to come back into place. Like I'm starting to find that consistent running that I had in the past. And I'm just very excited to see where that's gonna go over the next several weeks. I know I have a long build-up still ahead of me leading up to that marathon, but really excited with the progress that I'm seeing so far. So I hope your training for all of your goals in 2022 is going well. I am very excited to see some of you out at the David Goggins Challenge this weekend. If you're participating again, I hope you'll join me for that live video Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 1 hour before official kickoff for the run itself. But until then, I hope your training's going well. Remember to keep celebrating every finish line, every goal, every accomplishment. And until then, I look forward to seeing you around. Cheers.